Gig Gab 265, and Cover Band Confidential 100 for Sunday, July 19th, 2020.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Cover Band Confidential Podcast, the podcast for cover band musicians and band leaders to learn how to rock more and suck less. Here in San Jose, California, it's Paul Kent.
And here in Durham, New Hampshire, it's Dave Hamilton.
Greetings, folks, and welcome to Gig Gab, the podcast by, for, and about working musicians here in Atlanta, Georgia. I am Adam Johnson.
Here in Greensboro, North Carolina, I'm Dan Ray.
Well, here we all are. We made it happen.
And it went up.
Dude, my heart is like racing.
We made it through, though.
I know.
Like, that was almost smooth. You know, for no rehearsal, that was pretty good. Yeah. So, as everybody listening can figure out, if you don't know about both of these podcasts, now you do. Here at Gig Gab, we've been doing this thing where we talk about what we do, and it turns out the guys at Cover Band Confidential, you do exactly the same thing for your worlds. And so it made perfect sense to us to at least spend one episode together. We were trying to figure out, should we interview each other on our podcast? It's like, why can't we just do it together? So
yeah,
here we
absolutely.
are. Yeah. There we are.
You know, we
Do what we do.
As we were coming up on our big 100, the 100th episode, right? It was going to be a big deal, great big celebration, and then the world shut down, and it was like a really, really bad week. And we'd been chatting about this a while and planning it, and Dave Hamilton actually had the brilliant idea, like, your episodes don't actually have to go in numeric order. You can just skip 100 and come back when life's better. And so that's what we're doing. We're back to this is episode 100, even though we did 111 last week.
The rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yes, seriously.
But it got to the point where we were looking around and it was like, hey, this really isn't getting any better, so we might as well go ahead and hop on and get this thing under our belts.
I mean, it's slowly getting better, right? Like, it's not as bad as it was in terms of what we don't know. Like, we know more than we did in March or April or whatever it is, right? And so with that comes the ability to start making some decisions about different things. And we all want to talk about kind of the reopening and all that stuff. Should we introduce ourselves for each other's listeners?
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah.
So, Adam, tell me how you and Dan, like, how did your show come about? How do you guys know each other? How did that happen?
So, Dan and I don't know each other. That's the fun part.
That's right.
The way that this happened, and I would say that this entire interaction exists because of Steve over at Cover Band Central. What happened was that we were both members of that group, and we're kind of contributing to that, and just kind of found ourselves constantly being on the same side of the arguments that were kind of like popping up. And
I've never seen any arguments over there, so that's interesting.
I mean, you really got to look, you know.
Yeah,
really.
There's
really,
very go with the flow, mild opinions on that forum, and it's an amazing community.
It is,
and there are lots and lots of like-minded people, and so, you know, we just kind of set up this kind of like back channel DM back and forth kind of thing. And I had thought about starting a blog. I had already started posting under the Cover Band Confidential moniker, just writing blog posts. And I had invited Dan to write some articles, and he did. And, you know, we just kind of had this vibe. And I don't know, we probably talked about starting a podcast for about, I don't know, 6 months to a year before we actually like kicked it off. But it became pretty apparent. I was like, hey, do you want to do this? And he was like, yeah. And so we just kind of started doing it. And, you know, here we are.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Have you ever been in the same place at the same time?
Never. Not once.
Okay. So you've never played music together, clearly, if that's, yeah. Oh, interesting. Nope. Huh. All right.
You know, we had big plans for this year to like get together and do some stuff, and that might still happen. But as of right now, you know, most of those plans just kind of went. Yeah. Well, you know, there was talk about Summer NAMM, maybe going to Nashville and doing something together because it's kind of halfway between our two locations.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But that didn't happen. So,
oh, that sucks. Okay. Yeah. So Paul and I have known each other for 2 decades now, Paul. I mean, it's been a long, more than that. Definitely more than that. Yeah.
99, I think, right?
99 was the first gig, but you and I knew each other before that, right? So, 2000 was our first gig that we played together. So Paul and I
in New York is
what's that?
99 in the Faded Bathroom meeting in New York City.
The Faded Bathroom meeting. That's true. That the first place we both come from the Apple publishing conference world. That's how we met. Paul ran a conference on that side. I published some stuff on that side. Apple Computer, like Mac World Expo was actually the conference that Paul ran, and we had partnered on a couple of other things. You ran a couple other conferences, Paul. Like QuickTime Live, I think, was the thing we partnered on, right?
Yeah.
And then we met in a bathroom. Actually, after having an argument via email, we met in a. I saw you in there. I was like, all right, we got to like hash this out. And I was like, what better place to shake hands than a bathroom? 20 years later, that doesn't age all that well.
And what a quaint story now.
Yeah, like a thing that doesn't happen anymore, right? Yeah. But that's where we first shook hands, was at a bathroom sink, believe it or not. So yeah, it's just really weird to think about that in the context of today's world. But anyway, then I think it was at that same conference that you started floating the idea of putting together a band of musicians that played at the conference. And so that's how we really got to know each other, was playing music together.
Right.
And then we would have these chats all the time, right? And then 5.5 years ago, you came to me with an idea, right?
Well, Dave was like my therapist, as I've been running these bands, and I know that he's, and having known him from playing music, I know him to be a band guy who has a lot of deep thoughts about what it means to be in a band and what it means to be a musician. And so, we would just talk about once every couple of weeks about what's going on in our music lives. And then after a while, it was like, because he was building this podcasting empire, I was like, this is a thing. This, people might be interested in this if you're a musician. So probably took longer for us to find a name for it than it did for us to actually decide to do it, right?
Yeah. No, as soon as you brought me the idea, it was like, absolutely, let's go. No problem. Like, yep, there was no hesitation whatsoever. So, I was stoked about it. So
yeah.
And that was, how long ago was that?
So 5.5 years later, here we are. 5.5 years.
5.5 years later.
Yeah.
And I will say, the Gig Gab Podcast is, well, let me just, super inspiring to what we do. Very much, when we thought about doing this, it was like, can we live up to what these two guys are putting out every week? And some weeks we do, I think. Some weeks we're close.
You guys give us a bar to hit.
Great.
It's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
And you guys have done such a good job with, in his Mutual Love Fest here. You guys have done such a good job fostering community online. Dave and I mostly spend our time with the podcast. We interact on Facebook a little bit, but we also direct people to our website and those types of things. But you guys have done a really nice job making musicians feel at home in a way that you guys interact. Kind of, maybe before I say anything more, we probably should all raise a glass to Steve Witchell, right? Because he started doing something actually pretty cool, and that's really where a lot of inspiration comes from. So just Steve, but. I think
may your arm heal quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Servicing musicians and just the joy of talking about the experience of being a musician is really an infectious thing. Steve does it really well. You guys do it well online. Dave and I love what we do, talking to musicians all the time. And so here we are, four guys who just dig being a musician.
Adam, I got a question for you. When you raised your glass, what are you drinking?
Okay, so for those of our listeners who know that I've been quite the brand evangelist, I'm drinking Screwball peanut butter whiskey, and it's in like a little
I've heard of that
Sugar Skull.
That Sugar Skull thing is very similar. That's what inspired the Bitter Pill logo for one of the bands I'm in. So I like that glass. That's good.
Yeah, I think those were like a Halloween buy at Target.
Yeah.
I want to say one other thing that's kind of like an interesting roundabout thing on how we all know each other. About 10, 12 years ago, I was working at Apple with a guy named Neil Kent. And we had been friends for a long, long time. And talked about music all the time and kind of went and saw each other's shows and that kind of thing. And then at some point, I went and found Paul on Facebook, and I was like, one mutual friend, and it was Neil Kent. And I said, Neil, how do you know Paul Kent? He goes, he's my brother. And then like my entire like world exploded. So yeah, I mean, I played at I played at Neil's wedding, and pictures of Paul like going on in the background on like the slideshows and stuff. So
that's crazy.
It's just that's how small this world is.
It's just weird.
So the two of you have almost intentionally not met. Like you were literally in the same place. Yeah.
Well, I wasn't at that way.
You two been in the same room together.
No. So there were two ceremonies. There was like the destination wedding that was over like Mexico, I think is where it was, or
yeah, that's where I went.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they did a ceremony locally in the Atlanta area, and I played at that one.
Got it.
So
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It is confusing.
I was about to be jealous.
But it is a small world.
Yeah. I was trying to figure all this out, but that's good. Yeah. What are you drinking, Dan? I figure we should do this thing, right?
What I have here is the Hints and Allegations IPA from Odin Brewing down in my town here in Greensboro. Kind of a new shop, family owned, really great people, and I played their acoustic a bunch of times, and they've promised me their first full band setup once we open.
Whenever that is.
Nice. Yeah. Well, that's good.
They've spent their downtime building a stage there in their out parking lot area, so we will be the first ones.
Oh, that's good. That's great. Yeah.
Excellent.
Cool. Yeah.
What about you guys? What are you having?
Paul, what do you got?
Well, I got. Let me set this up just a little bit. I've got the perfect drink for a musician who spent the first 4 weeks of lockdown doing nothing but eating my wife's cooking. So I have Zevia 0-calorie cream soda. Thank you very much.
Hey man,
nice.
I was just showing you like this was the drink from last episode on Thursday, which is just sparkling water. You know, it's not always fun time, but you know,
right? Yeah.
You got anything good, Dave?
I'm drinking Tension Tamer tea in my Mac Geek Gab mug with enhanced with ginseng. So there you go. Yeah, you know, a little something. I might switch to something.
Really have covered the gamut here.
We have. I might switch to a beer now that we have a stream going and everything's working. But I figured I should stay on this side of the beer train until we had like something that was. But it's working. So we've got, for our Gig Gab listeners, this will be available on our Facebook and YouTube pages. And yes, it's the first time we are doing video. So there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a new frontier for us.
Two guys with a face for radio.
A couple months. Yeah. You know, I am actually in our little like green screen studio right now, but like no keying. Maybe we can do that in post later on. But
you could actually. Yeah, no problem. No.
Sorry for all you guys in live stream.
So I want to talk about it's no great surprise to anybody watching this that we're in the middle of a quarantine here, and specifically, obviously, for us musicians, that meant, at least for a while, no gigs. And now it means very interestingly coordinated gigs. And I think at least two of us have played. Is that correct? So Paul hasn't. Dan, have you? Not.
I did an acoustic gig about a month ago.
Okay. All right. Okay. And Adam, you played last night, right?
I did. It was a last minute thing right by my house. But yeah, it was. I'm still kind of risk averse to the whole thing. We actually we were supposed to do a whole thing coming up this week, like a full band gig for like a municipal event. And it just got too weird to talk about. We ended up requesting them to reschedule it later on. But it was like an open air gig in an alleyway between restaurants. So, risk was pretty mitigated. I had my mask with me if I needed to go inside to get a drink or use the bathroom or whatever.
Sure.
So yeah, I didn't feel weird about it. I've had this like weird lightheadedness, and I'm like, totally WebMDing myself. I had a glass of wine with dinner, and it went away. So I guess I might have to continue going down that route.
Self-medicating. Yeah. Well, be careful. That's, there you go. That's how things start.
It's the only thing that stops the voices, you guys.
Yeah.
That's a path. That is a path. I will say I had 2 gigs scheduled for this weekend, and I canceled both of them. I canceled the full band gig on Saturday and the acoustic gig on Sunday, just because, here the numbers just keep climbing. We're not, It's not gone parabolic here in North Carolina, but it's dead linear growth. And we couldn't get our heads around it as a family. So the decision.
I got a question for both of you guys, though.
Yeah.
A little bit of a lag here, so sorry about that. My question for you guys is, like, you guys are making these decisions, and they're hard, emotional, responsible decisions, I think. What is it like in both your areas? Are musicians taking gigs and pushing for gigs and trying to get people together and, acting as though things are normal?
I'll take the lead on that one. So our state, I live in Georgia, which is one of the first states to open, and we were having, gigs start up basically immediately as soon as that thing was lifted. People were out and they were playing, and I didn't feel really comfortable about it, and there were a lot of guys out there doing what they were doing, and a lot of them have continued to play and haven't had any adverse effects. But we did see a lot of the restaurants that were kind of on the front end of that situation close back down because they were getting cases at those locations. And so I think, for us, it's kind of a matter of picking and choosing. I'm not going to take a show where I feel like the risk is too high. It would take a lot for me to do an indoor gig right this second. Yeah. But like an outdoor open air thing in like a common area, it seemed like a pretty easy, call to make.
Yeah. Yeah. My first gig back was an outdoor open air acoustic gig. There was this place is set up literally perfect for pandemic. It's a community football field that they use for Pop Warner or whatever. There is a little hill that comes out of one of the end zones, and there is a permanent cement stage with a roof at the top of that hill. So we set up on the stage, and the crowd set up in the football field. So they literally had 100 yards of space to socially distance. And that gig taught me a lot, because I had a ton of Gig Gab listeners have already heard the story, but I had a ton of reentry anxiety about the whole thing. And I finally had to decide for myself, what are the things that I need to be able to say yes to in order to feel comfortable doing a gig? Because I can always, I proved that I could always find reasons to say no. And I could do that for years, and I wasn't convinced that was particularly healthy, right? So 2 of the main things, and obviously if some huge red flag comes up, then that changes everything. But here in New Hampshire, our numbers are just like dropping and dropping and dropping, and people have really seemed to have a handle on it. But it could totally go the other way very, very quickly, as we all know. Yeah. And it takes keeping a handle on it. But my two litmus tests are, do I feel safe with my bandmates on stage? And do I feel like, the real question is, do I feel like I would be comfortable having my family come and watch the show? And that sort of zooms out to, can people be as safe as they choose to be? Right? Because I can't control if people want to, congregate as a group of 30, like some people did at that gig at the football field. But then there were another 30 groups of, presumably like family pods, all, 10 plus feet from one another. And the 30 people, from what I saw, weren't chastising. And, there was no back and forth, and there was no interaction. Like the 30 people that felt like they were okay being together didn't feel like they needed to impose that on the rest of the people there. And so it was like, okay, my family did come to that gig, and they felt fine. Like they shared the same view I did. Like, I don't think those 30 people are doing the right thing, but that's not up to us, right? Like, we provided the opportunity to do it as safely as you wanted. So those are my metrics. And if the answer is no, and there have been actually more gigs than not where I have said no because of one or both of those. This weekend, I had an interesting scenario. I've been doing a theater show indoors the cast and crew and everybody, it's a small show. It's a show called Hedwig and the Angry Inch. So it's basically a show about a rock band, which makes things really small, person wise, which is great. Like, I don't know how I would feel if it was 20 people versus, 7. But everybody got tested beforehand, and we all have the ongoing, awkwardly transparent conversation about what we're all doing, like sharing the details of our lives that you would never think it would be appropriate to share with each other. But that's what it takes to be comfortable with each other. And then the audience is socially distant and in masks 100% of the time, including while seated 6+ feet from one another. Well, there was another production rehearsing in the same building. And earlier this week, one of the people in that production tested positive. They started getting symptoms on like Sunday, and then, got worse on Monday and Tuesday. They went for a rapid test Wednesday and came back positive. And at that point, it was like, okay, full stop. Like, we need to, figure out what happened, contact trace, do the whole thing. Everything was canceled. The other show has remained canceled and will not come back. What I found out as I, dug into it was that this person was in the theater the last time before we ever arrived. So we had, as Hedwig, we had no contact with this person. And so it was like, okay, well, wait a minute. I asked him, I said, hey, again, just asking my 2 questions. What would it take for me to feel safe, and what would it take for my family to feel safe? If we all get tested again, just to make sure everything's copacetic, and the theater is cleaned and we wait 2 weeks, like, why does the entire run need to be canceled? And the funny part was, they said to me, well, this is fascinating that you asked this question, because we assumed you would not step foot in the theater again based on how careful you've been about everything. And so now that you've asked, maybe we can do, the final weekend or something like that. And I'm like, well, I mean, let's answer all the questions, because I can't just like let fear drive things. I have to kind of let logic drive things. And so, at this point, everybody's been tested. Everybody was negative. And in the end, it turns out that this person contracted it after they left the theater the last time they were there. So it never was in the theater that we know of. Now, when I walk on stage, I presume that every single person I don't know in the crowd is infected. Because I don't know that they're not, right? But so there's that assumption you sort of have to take going in. And do you feel safe? Are you far enough from them? All that stuff. But yeah, it was an interesting week from that standpoint.
And you have to presume that you are too.
Correct.
Right. You have to presume that you are.
Yeah. I mean,
not go near anyone.
You have to, except in the scenarios I've been in, I've been closer than 6 feet to my bandmates in a scenario where you kind of like it, and not just Hedwig. In fact, Hedwig's been the safest of all of them. Everybody was wearing masks during rehearsals and in the hallway. I was saying to Paul the other day, I felt like this privileged jerk as I would walk from the dressing room to the stage, because everybody was in masks except like me and our guitar player. And, it was like this weird thing, like I should be wearing a mask, but it was, I mean, we were all being tested regularly and all that stuff. So, it was like, this is just how it is and it's fine. But yeah, you have to assume that everything is, unless you know.
How about North Carolina?
We have, it's a mixed bag. I know many bands that are, and solo players who are just opting out for now, just abundance of caution, not going to go there. I know some people who are, particularly the group that are like solo acoustic full-timers. It's their main gig.
Yeah.
They're booked every day. They're playing every day. And they say they're doing it safely. I happen to know from some of the chatter on the socials that they shared attitudes with people who I don't experience to be behaving very safely. But I haven't been to their shows. I don't know what's going on there. So it's all over the place. I know some venues are, the place that we canceled at is a place we played a lot of times. We have a standing monthly there, standing monthly gig there with the full band. And it's just like really home for us. And the manager, that's fantastic. And she really was doing it right. I mean, it was full masking. She had, they built this line to get up to where you could order at the bar that had stickers every 6 feet. And I was like, really, well organized and doing it as right as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And you know, when I canceled on her the day before, having tried really hard to justify it and rationalize it, and finally just getting that I had to do that. First of all, she completely got it, totally understood, was not a problem for her. And you know, there was going to be, we were going to set up outside, and it was looking like rain, which meant we'd have to move inside, which none of us were comfortable with. So, you know, so it's all over the place is the point. I think some places are putting their toe back in the water. Others are going full on. It's interesting.
Can places
what's the Bay Area looking like?
Yeah, let me share this, Dave. So there's not a lot of gigs here. I mean, there have been a couple of restaurants that have tried, and they just got shut down again, right? So Simon and my band, you know, a restaurant that, you know, was actually the owner of this restaurant was quite progressive, did quite a bit for the community, you know, giving them a safe way to kind of do a drive-up grocery store type of thing. And you know, he had a lot of goodwill. He put a giant tent out in his parking lot and tried to do it there. He just got shut down again, and Simon lost the gig. And there have been a few things that have tried, but really there are no gigs now. There was just, I heard of a couple of musicians who just set up in a park. There's a reasonably well-known guy in San Francisco who has a Rolling Stones tribute band that has started saying, hey, I'm going to be in the park, come check me out. And I got to say, you know, my perspective on this is kind of a meld of all of you guys. Is like, I have turned down gigs. I gave up the gigs, or the gigs were canceled that I had. My perspective on this is that the biggest lesson we're getting, now my buddy Dave is the man for diving into the finite, right? You know, into the data. And I tend to go more like what am I seeing? And mostly what I see is like, in general, very selective application of human values, right? Very selective application of good behavior. You know, in addition to the no one's going to take away my rights, or I thought this was America, you got that part of people.
Yep.
You've also got, you know, the people who just get swept up in the moment. There's some people around who are saying, hey, we used to have music in the park every Wednesday. I'll bring a boombox. Everybody just show up. My personal opinion on this, and again, I hear fully, and Dave actually changed my mind about this because I thought my opinion should be the universal opinion, as I want to do. But
we all are that way, aren't we?
So my opinion is that as a musician, I don't want to be part of the problem of encouraging people to congregate, given my opinion of how human nature seems to be playing through this now. It might be 99% more safer outside, and they might put circles on the ground in the park, you know, and encourage people to stay in their little sphere. But in general, over and over, every time I see someone doing something, I never see a mask. Right? I see a lot of not socially distant people. And then again, you know, there's always, when there's a video, you know, I thought this was America, you know, or no one's going to take away my rights, or, you know, these types of things. And there's just a huge clash. And my opinion is this is all going to lead for it all to get rolled back. And so I think I don't want to play the iterative game and be part of the encouraging people to possibly get sick. I'm just pretty much shut down. And I'll tell you, you guys can, I'm sure, appreciate it. It kills me. I mean, I whined to Dave about this for the past 6 weeks. It literally kills me, and I want to go do stuff. But I have to just feel like I have to make this kind of moral stand, put a stake in the ground and say, it's gonna get worse, you know, until we really shut it down.
Yeah. Well, and
besides just the whole like. Sorry. So beside the whole like morals thing, you need to look at this from like a branding standpoint, because, you know, you have bands like Great White who did this event in North Dakota where there was no masks, no social distancing, and they got blasted. And so,
and of all bands that risk their fans' health, right?
These guys,
right? From a branding standpoint, like that's really hard to roll back from.
Well, it's kind of on brand for them, isn't it? I mean, you know.
That's a little on the nose. Maybe I feel like that's even too soon. That was the Jack Russell version. This is like the spinoff of the spinoff of the spinoff.
Right.
Those guys. Yeah. Jack Russell's like, not me, guys. I was from that. Not. You don't want to remember me from the other one either, but
yeah. It's and I mean, like,
I think the moral position is. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, like where he is, things are getting worse, right? Like things have in California in general, maybe not your area in particular, but things kind of turned a bad corner there for a little while, or at least, yeah. So, I mean, I think you certainly from my standpoint, you got to look at it like what things are like around you and what that, because that's going to absolutely play a role here. Yeah.
Yeah. Risk reward.
Yeah.
But to your point, Adam, it is what does my band stand for? And the few times that I've kind of shared, hey, folks, we miss playing for you, but we don't want to do it until it's absolutely safe, has gotten a very positive review. And I'm really happy with that. Yes. It's hard again when I see other people just kind of like making their own rules as they go. But this is bigger than a gig. This is if we don't figure it out, it's going to be a longer term. Did you see AEG and Live Nation that they came out with statements, or at least they were in interviews? Their presidents have said might not be touring concerts till 2022.
Yeah, I saw 2021. I didn't see 2022. I mean, I'm not surprised by that. Now, on the other side of that, as far as Live Nation goes, my friend Nick and the guys in Yacht Rock Review just did one of those big drive-in events. And we're trying to work out an interview with Nick. I think next week is kind of like, fingers crossed, we're going to get him on the schedule to kind of talk about that experience.
Nice.
Because as far as cover bands go, there's not really anybody kind of above what they're doing on that level. And they were doing the same thing that like Brad Paisley was doing. So, I really wanted to get their perspective on everything. And, their whole operation has kind of ground to a halt, and they've got like a whole like corporation behind them. So just trying to figure out their whole, how they're navigating that and stuff. So
I stumbled onto something this week that hopefully can help folks out there as your bands are getting ready either to play a gig or even just to rehearse. This whole concept of a social contract where you're communicating with each other about what you're doing and that way so your families can chime in and all of that stuff. But I've found, and I've been trying to do that with everyone, and I play in a bunch of different bands, which is great because I can speak sort of non-specifically here, and most people won't be able to figure out who I'm talking about. But the bands that I've played with didn't have any problem with the whole social contract thing. But it was always a weird conversation. Like, okay, we got to talk about what we're doing. And everybody would do what they thought was the amount of sharing they needed to do. And then it was like, okay, cool. Turns out one person involved, and sometimes it was me, but sometimes it wasn't, would say, great, now let's take that and do it times 10 so that we actually know what, people have been up to. And it's an awkward thing. I found the litmus test this week, no pun intended. Testing is really easy to get done here in New Hampshire right now. The state has made it so that you can go and you don't have to be symptomatic or anything. They are encouraging everyone to get tested and multiple times and all of that stuff. And it's free. If you have health coverage, of course, they'll bill it through that. But if you don't, then there's just no charge. And or the state picks it up. And asking the simple question of, hey, look, I've got a family, but I also play in, this other band. Would everybody, there was a gig proposed to me the other day. I was like, great. Yep. I'm open that day. It would be outside. Like the on the surface, the particulars of it looked okay. So I was like, cool. Well, just like, let's all just make sure we get tested. And then, a week before the gig, whatever it is, time to get the results back. And then we'll have a conversation about what we've all been doing from the testing, essentially quarantining as much as possible between the day we get the test and the day of the gig. And immediately the gig was canceled by the person that was coordinating it. And I had a feeling that would happen. And so it was like, yep, perfect. Great. I don't need to worry about being on stage with this person because I won't be on stage with this person right now.
Yeah.
And so just asking everybody to get tested is like a super easy, like I said, litmus test. So yeah.
How long does it take for you to get your results back?
Somewhere between, they say now 3 and 7 days, but if you need a rapid test, there's a place that I can go that's not quite an hour away that'll do it for $25 in 15 minutes. So, yeah.
Nice.
And that's where, we need to get to, I think, is where we can all just get tested. And then things start to become a little easier. There's a whole lot less question. So go ahead, Dan.
Be able to do it at load in.
Well, let me tell you this kind of related story. My drummer, 2 weeks before the gig that would have been Saturday that we canceled, got back from a trip to Jamaica. He and his wife went to Sandals. And so we saw him doing that. And I actually was not aware that was happening. And there's like, suddenly I'm seeing pictures of him from out of the country. And I'm like, what is happening here? It turned out the airline required a rapid test before they would board you.
Oh, that's great.
Nice.
So, yeah. So they knew everyone on the plane was clean. They knew everyone at the resort was clean. There was actually another round of testing for anyone who the airline didn't get when they got there. So like the whole place was basically, it was like vacation under quarantine.
Wow.
And, yeah.
And did they have to do that on the flight back too?
I don't know. I didn't. Maybe I don't know. I didn't hear that part of it.
It doesn't matter.
But
Yeah.
that would be the other piece you'd want to cover, right? But when I heard all that story, I was like, actually, he might be the safest of us right now. That's that's pretty good. Actually.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. If we can get the testing to a point where it's, the results, it's easy to do either what they call the rapid test or to get results, even 24 hours from the thing. Like my kids are both going off to college. And so that's a whole other thing to look at. And my daughter, who's going to the University of New Hampshire, they've got, because they're a research university, they just so happens they have like tons of capacity for testing. They're like, we can get things done in way less than 24 hours. Like they're like, we're going to run the lab 24/7 for the fall semester. It's like, great. That's great. It's not going to be perfect. There is no zero risk, right? And even staying home,
right.
There is no zero. I mean, you might be at almost zero risk from a health standpoint, physical health. But, like economic health and emotional health, like you can't ignore any of those. Right. And that's the hard part, is this balancing act of physical, economic and emotional. There is we won't know for a decade what the right answer was.
That's right.
And it's hard. It sucks.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of noticing as we're having this conversation, like our foreheads are generally nodding in the same direction. And actually, that's kind of one of the cool things that I found about doing Gig Gab, and I'm sure you guys find with yours, is that like musicians are kind of musicians. Almost doesn't matter where you are. There are differentiations from the mean in different ways of things, but we're all dealing with like, is it a good gig? Is it a worthwhile gig? Is my band member being cool or not being cool? We're in dealing with these things. That has been one of the best reflections of doing Gig Gab, is that this kind of global community of semi-professional, we call them weekend warriors, often musicians. Really, we are dealing with the same stuff all over, and the pandemic is no different, right?
It's no different. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's always going to be a through line of like certain things that like everybody just kind of latches onto. And, even in the parts where like people kind of slightly differ in opinions, I think we still are kind of going through the same kinds of experiences regardless. And, like in our community, we have definitely had to have some conversations with people or cut people loose who, were not contributing in that way and not necessarily following the, what we would consider best practices and that kind of thing. So, and you run that risk when you're running, when you're a part of a community where like, there's always going to be kind of like dissenting opinions, and you can either choose to engage with those people or go, okay, you've had your fun. It's,
Well, and that's why I give you guys props. Dave and I have somewhat consciously stayed away from being in the forum moderation business, and you guys have done a really, really good job.
Yeah.
I tell people flat out, this is my sandbox. So
yeah, no, that's the right way to do it, I think. Yeah. Hey, one of the things we do on Gig Gab is we answer listeners' questions when they write in with stuff. Can we move past the pandemic, at least in terms of the flow of this episode? Please, let's talk about anything
else.
Great. Awesome.
Please.
So I thought this question when it came in was perfect. It's from Mr. X, or Mrs. X, actually, I don't even remember. I recently experienced a very unfortunate conclusion to a great gig I've been a part of for the better part of 4 years. Without getting into the details, of course, it was very hard to come to this decision, especially considering it was out of my hands. With the gig climate being how it is right now, it's very hard for a full-time player to try and recover and continue working when there is simply not much work to be had. At the risk of turning you two, or you four, into gig musician therapists, I thought we had crossed that bar a long time ago. There's no risk. We're already there. Have you ever been through breakups that really shook you and brought your music world to a screeching halt? Personal affairs aside, what do we have to do to get through and press on? Obviously, things like networking and asking around are a given, but then right now there's COVID. It's a situation I never would have expected to be in. I've done a few gigs since the start of the pandemic, which was hard enough, and now, well, nothing. So, we've talked enough about the pandemic part of this. Let's just talk about the moving on from a gig, from both the perspective of the musician, which it seems like, this person is asking about, but also, the band needing a new member. Like, what are the ways that how do you guys do it? If you needed a new member or you needed to find a new gig, Adam, what would you do?
I mean, in this particular instance, I feel like there's a leverage conversation to be had. So for the band who now needs a new member, I feel like they have lots of leverage because you have a known entity that you can then pick from a potentially larger pool of players because there's much more availability. Now for the person who is now venturing out on their own, on the same note, like depending on what position they play, like if they're a vocalist or if they're, if they have the ability to do things by themselves, I think that's also a super unique opportunity because there's nothing, in my opinion, better than being in a situation where you get to call all your own shots. So I'd say there's kind of a dual upside. That's just the optimist in me, maybe.
I like it.
I'll tell you, we had in the House Rockers, our other guitar slot. So I'm one guitar and then there's the other slot. It has been Spinal Tap. We went through a lot of people combusting everything you can imagine. But the two guys who were like, I wish they would have stuck. They both had similar reasons. Like, I was pretty clear about what the gig was in terms of lead singing opportunities and all type of stuff. And they took the gig and then immediately had hoped it would change, I think. Both of them excellent players that I have a lot of respect for. And the reason I continue to have a lot of respect for them is both of them, when they came to the conclusion that they weren't going to get what they wanted from the band, and they came to me and said, hey, it's not my thing. They both said, I will stay with you until you get someone, or let's pick a reasonable amount of time. And their reputation is golden with me, and they've sat in with us. And, and I think that's one thing about leaving a situation. As in many things in life, keep it as cool as possible. I mean, you can never have too many friends. And the leaving of a band is not a personal thing. Often it's a creative thing, quite often someone is looking for something, a fit that they want to have happen. So my best feedback to Mr. X is hopefully you are divorcing in as good terms as you can and taking a good reputation with you and going out into the world with that good reputation and the respect of the people who you last played with. And you now have one more asset by which you can go. And, if you're a trusted musician, if you have a good reputation, that's a big thing to bring into any new situation. So I'm not going to comment too much about like the right way or wrong way, other than a smart thing to do is to have a healthy divorce.
I wish conscious uncoupling, right?
I wish we were doing Gig Gab, like Paul, back when I left Groove Syndicate, because that is the one band that I left in the worst way. I could sit here and defend my reasons for calling people out the way that I did when I left that band, but it was like, looking back, there is no excuse for I should have just walked away. I didn't need to tell them why. And that,
Adam and Dan, do you guys have day jobs? Like Adam used to work at Apple, Dan, and you're still in tech in some way?
Yep.
Okay.
And Dan, you have a day job?
I am. Yep.
So we have these interesting conversations. Dave runs his business, and I've run my business and businesses in the past, and we talk about the transfer of business chops to running bands or being in a band, and how some of it is applicable, but much of it is not. It's a very, very different vibe. creative endeavors, the business part of running things, there's more, but really in dealing with creative people and trying to, create something that makes great music, that's a different vibe than most businesses have. Not necessarily exclusive, but right. I've certainly learned, I've had to check myself, and a lot of times when kind of working with people who are in my band, that there's a different language that works. It just, talking about performance and goals and the types of things I would do in a day job gig are not the things that resonate with a band member. And I think this concept of having an amicable parting is one of those things where it's slightly different. You might tell your boss, screw you, I'm going to go off, and that might work for you, that might not. But certainly carrying emotional baggage out of a creative endeavor is a painful thing. And so you don't want that if you don't have to have that.
It's hard.
I will just to underscore what you just said, Paul. Yeah, totally. To underscore that a little bit, I think while there may be exceptions, I'm willing that there might be exceptions to this, you'll almost never go wrong taking the high road. And when I left the band that I was in before I started the Clinky Lincolns, it was a cover band, party band, whatever, some originals that the band leader had written, and they were fine, had fun with them. But I kept pushing our repertoire into party stuff, hireable cover band stuff.
Totally feel you.
And there was always this sort of kind of half willingness on his part. And when that finally came to a head, he wrote an email to the band about how the purpose of this band was not what it's doing now. And it was aimed at me very clearly. It was well written and well said, and it wasn't an attack. I wrote my email response and deleted it and wrote another one and deleted it and wrote another one and deleted it and wrote another one.
Absolutely.
And finally what I came to was look, I get it. The vision of this band is not what I've been pushing it to be. And I don't want to step on anybody's vision. And, and I have these ideas for what a band could do. And so, I'm going to start my own thing over here on the side, and I'm not leaving you. And, I'll be able to express that over there and be part of this over here, and it'll all work. And then, eventually the scheduling got to where that was not possible. But,
sure.
I had to wrestle myself to the higher ground on that. I had to nothing about me wanted to take responsibility for that tension at first until I really fought myself about it. So sometimes it takes that to break up amicably. Sometimes
good on you, man. That's great. Cheers.
Well, it wasn't where I started.
No, it never is, right? That's the key.
You don't. Yeah, there's no penalty for it not being where you started. It's only how you finished it that is a smart thing, and that's the reflection. So I just think that, this guy who wrote in, it's step one: be cool about how you end one relationship, and because you're going to take some residual of that out into the world with you. And then as you go out looking, I think Adam's advice is really smart. I mean, the more you can control your own ship, the more you can cover lean times until you find something. That just makes a lot of sense. But, I think you also want to ask the questions. The gentleman seemed fond of the band that he was leaving. Is he able to ask the question in his next situation to make sure that he doesn't get into a similar situation?
Yeah. Based on the language of what he said, he said it was outside of his or her control. So I think there might be an opportunity to do some reflection, maybe get some feedback as to what that part is. It's a tough pill. If it is something that is within your ability to control, that causes you to not be a good fit for a situation. But I always feel like there's value in having that kind of conversation to kind of figure out what can I bring into the next creative venture that I've got coming up. That might be smart. That might fit, work better long term.
Well, and it could be a square peg round hole scenario, like you described, Dan. Right, where you wanted a different thing. It didn't mean what everybody else wanted was the wrong thing. It just meant that they were different things, and that's okay. So yeah.
We came up with a term called man cave bands.
Yeah.
So that's what Dan, the situation that Dan was in. He was in a man cave band, but he didn't know it.
Yep.
So a lot of these projects are just this is just an excuse for me to drink beer in my basement.
It's bowling night.
But Yeah, but like sometimes you get in a band and you don't know that until it's too late.
Right. I've found myself in bands like that. Yeah. And sometimes it's okay. Like when I joined, Fling has been that band and also very much not been that band on a cycle. When I joined it, it was very much that band, but I was new to this area and it was like, well, I want bowling night. Like I don't know anybody here. I don't like to bowl, but I like to play the drums, so like I'll go do that. That's fine. But even the people in my family were like, are you sure you want to do this? I'm like, yeah, these people are all like dads with kids our age in this town. Like, yes, I want to get to know them. They're like, but they're not playing gigs. I'm like, it's fine. I'm playing gigs with the other band. It's all good. Like I got this.
House
Thank you for asking.
Right.
Yeah.
In the House Rockers, it's a 10-piece band, and 5, maybe 6 of the guys derive their income from playing music. They teach during the day and they play music in the evening. And they're fairly clear that the financial part of it is one of the big attractions. And if if it's not happening in my band, they may have to go. As much as they like my band, if there's something else, they may be like, well, this gig is going to pay more. I got to take that, and that wouldn't work for me. So, and then I have guys who are in the middle. So I have guys who they want some financial security, but they want to play stuff that I can't book, right? And so, and everything in between those conversations are the things. And the point relative to the gentleman who just left a band is you're dealing with, in any band, the best ones are on the same page and moving forward in the same direction, but that's a pretty rare thing. 100% everybody in the same room. Maybe original bands, but even at that, I suppose there's how many of my original songs are in here and like that thing. But, for bands that are in the cover genre, and I love that term man cave, we've been saying dad bands, and there's nothing wrong with either of those two things. Right. Like everybody, that's what they want it to be.
As long as you know what it is. Yeah.
Exactly. We have a merch line with a shirt that says defend dad bands.
Yeah.
You can buy it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I'll shoot you a link.
That's good.
That's great. I'm definitely going to buy that shirt. That's great.
But that's a different thing than the band that wants to charge $10,000 for a wedding, and what the expectations are. Because the poor guy who's going out to try and book it, he can't bring obscure B-side stuff to the wedding genre, right?
No.
So so anyway, I think that's always, it seems to always come back to that conversation. Like, are you and your band members on the same page? And if not, do you have a channel of communication to kind of talk through the realities of that? That doesn't have to be the end of a band when people aren't on the same page 100%. Sometimes 72%, sometimes 63% is enough for everybody's needs, as long as you have a channel to, to agree to stuff and talk through stuff. And that, I think that's the biggest skill you take out of leaving one band, and you want to remind yourself as you go to find another band.
I think
the best term I know about that is called casting vision. So like if you are the band leader, that's your responsibility, is to cast the vision of what this project is. And if you can do that, authentically and like accurately with people as they come in, then you don't have that, well, I can change this situation and maybe it'll turn into something else. Like, as long as you are upfront, you may avoid having those conversations later on.
I personally find that it's not only being upfront, it's that it's reminding people in a delicate and professional way on an ongoing basis. Because, like I said, the guys who were in my band, great local players, they got into it and they wanted to contribute more. I can actually see it from a distance more. Not that they were, I can do better, or, I want my, even though I agreed that it was going to be this, they were into it and they wanted something I couldn't give them at the expense of something else. So the conversations, and I've had to learn this skill over the 20 years of this band being together, is how do you politically and just being a good dude, just remind people, remember, this is our mission, this is what your role is, this is the type of thing. Do it with that. And that's one of those things where in the day job, if a guy gets, if the guy's not really worth it and he's going to be that guy who wants, to change the deal, you say goodbye and go get someone else. That's a viable thing. It's more painful in an at-will situation like a band.
Yeah. So, all right. So the second part of this question was how to go find musicians, right? So the obvious is put your feelers out with your network. Assuming that someone needs to do more than that in your area, Dan, like what would you do, or how would you find a band member, or how would you find a band?
I will tell you, and I say this on stage, My drummer and my bassist I've gotten some pretty good furniture off Craigslist, but my drummer and bassist are by far my best Craigslist finds of my entire life.
Yep.
And I've scored really great partners and really great musicians off Craigslist, which is crazy because I hardly ever go there for anything else. There are some other channels around here. There's some Facebook groups that are, always people looking for gigs and looking for opportunities that are local. But I would not discount Craigslist. It's active, and there's a lot of people on it. You have to screen pretty hard.
Yeah,
that's it.
But you can screen pretty hard with Craigslist right up front. Like if you put in your ad, or if you're answering ads, you look at read what they're asking you for. And if you put in an ad, I want somebody that can do, we're playing party music. Are you, will you give me your first right of refusal, and send me 5 links of you playing other things. When you answer that ad, send them the 5 links. In fact, send 7, but don't send a quick little note like, hey, tell me more about your band. I'd love to learn what you got going on. Like, that's not what the person asked for. So they're they're not even going to answer you unless maybe you're the only one,
right.
But like, there's ways, just like with resumes, with a job. I mean, tailor your response to that person, sell to them, and then get to know them. And then, 6 months down the road when you're having a beer at a gig, tell them, oh yeah, here's how I manipulated you into making sure you put me at the top of the list. But by that point, like everything's good, but yeah.
I'd augment that with, I'd say the first 10 years I had my band, Craigslist brought me some decent players or subs. But the second 10 years was the result of networking the first 10 years, right? Yeah. I wouldn't need to look on Craigslist now. Totally. And this is, I don't know, right. In different areas, open mics are going to have different levels of people, right? But if you just know, right, some of them are open mic players, right? And that's what they do is they go to open mics and, that's it. But networking and understanding people who are going in, leaving one band, like this guy might be, networking is a skill, and it's awkward for a lot of musicians because it's a human external interaction type of thing, right? But I right now, for any role in my band, I would go to my network more than I would go to Craigslist.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think I get all of my subs based on word of mouth.
Yeah.
I've got enough of a network in this area that, if I need a bass player, I can shoot an email to somebody and I can get 9 emails back of people I need to reach out to.
That's it. Yeah. And that, it requires going seeing other bands play and introducing yourself. I've met people who have come up and said, hey, if you ever need a sub, we don't sub very much in our group, but, I make that first character judgment about how they approach me, in that, and that actually decides whether they go into the
list,
call list.
Yeah, of course.
So, but networking is a thing, and it's a valuable skill, and maybe that's the answer for Mr. X is like you can do it through Craigslist, There's ups and downs to it. There's sometimes you can get a magic fit, but there's a lot of really bad fits, and there's a lot of really bad communicators that you don't know really what you're going to take your time to go audition for. That's the downside of being an auditioning musician. But if you are involved in a scene, getting to know the band leaders in the scene, offering your services as a sub, just being aware of what's going on, that turns into a fruitful, because you've kind of self-selected the people that you think are kind of cool.
Let me suggest a new school suggestion. Because of the era that we are in, and based on maybe the age range of wherever this person is, personal branding 100% is something that you need to really invest in. So it could be as simple as, if you're trying to build a reputation in an area, really start putting your wares out online. So if you've got an Instagram account, post you playing certain stuff. Make sure that you're tagging yourself in the area in which you live. If you have a YouTube channel, make sure that you are contributing content to that. Make sure that you are your contact information is easy to find on all of those channels.
Smart.
Because of, in this particular instance, there's not a lot of opportunities to go to shows, to network with other people. This is the new marketplace. So if you have an online presence, you need to cultivate it to garner that kind of attention. And if you don't, then you need to start working on that. And this is the perfect time to do it, because there's no other thing that you can be doing right now. So
no, and that's like I think that's good advice for every single one of us and anybody listening, whether you have a gig that is 100% solid or you're like this guy who's just left or anywhere in between. Start doing that now, because the longer tail you've got on that, the better off you are the next time you either have to ask someone to come play with you or ask someone to have you come play with them, because it builds trust. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and it gives you, it's your reputation.
That's it.
And it's easily verifiable.
Right.
You don't have to worry about like talking to Jimmy and Jimmy's like, oh, he's cool. Like you can go onto their channel and be like, oh, snap, this guy's got chops. And then maybe ask around about like, is he a good hang?
Is he a jerk? Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But like, you can depending on what you need in the moment, you can get aside from jerk if you've got chops.
Yep.
But if you want to stay somewhere long term, then you've got the whole package that you've got to worry about.
Yeah. That's it. Yep. It's good. Start a podcast. That's a good way to let people get to know you, for better and for worse. So there you go.
Yeah, we've kind of gotten into the coaching realm a little bit.
Yeah.
It's something that we offer. We don't do it a whole lot, but it is something that, I guess you can kind of use to, we do this to establish our quote unquote, knowledge or
credibility.
Experience.
Yeah.
And then, you kind of spread that out that way. So
I'm always surprised we get specific requests for coaching, but we are extremely verbose that just our opinion, this is what dawns on me. Take it for what it's worth, right?
Yeah.
Coaching seems like a pretty daunting word, but we are asked specifically, guys, what would you do? That type of thing. It tends to be the nature of the requests that we get for type of stuff. But, just like everybody else, we're just figuring it out. We'll offer what we have, take it or leave it.
Yeah. But that's what people I think are looking for. I think because exactly what you were saying, Adam, like and you guys are the same on your show. Like people know who you are and what you do, and they know your opinions if they've listened even for a little bit.
Yeah.
And so they want to know, like, okay, can you level set me and sanity check me? And sure, I guess.
It's more like confirmation bias stuff. You agree with what I agree with, right?
Yeah, that's totally. Yeah. Because we don't have enough of that in our world these days.
No.
Wait, sorry.
We should invent some kind of media, make it real social, and people could do that.
Weird.
Anti-social media is more like
Great plan. Great plan.
Great plan. Yeah. All right. Anything else before we figure out how to say goodbye? That we figured out how to get into this. We did not figure out how to get out of it. But
no.
Anything else? No. Okay.
This was really cool. I want to thank you two guys. I think you guys kind of pushed the idea that we need to have a summit here. So very cool to see you guys in person. And thanks for the nice things you say about us. But we think you guys are awesome. So keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the beauty of this whole situation is that, there can be so many different voices. And I think, part of the reason why Dan and I started talking about this is that you guys have kind of like set the pathway. And there were certain things that certain stances that you guys took that we didn't necessarily agree with. And I was like, I think there's space for this where we can kind of talk about these things in a different way that, resonate with different people. Totally. But as much as that goes, I still listen to you guys every single week. So, there's plenty of good stuff on all sides.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. No.
Absolutely. Boy, any Cover Band Confidential listeners, if you don't know Gig Gab, you got to know Gig Gab. Just 100%. Go subscribe to Gig Gab.
It's not like you don't have time to listen to two, right?
That's right. Yeah, and the same the same goes in the other direction. If you're listening to Gig Gab, you think after 5 years I'd be able to say this, but if you're listening to Gig Gab and you haven't heard of or aren't listening to Cover Band Confidential, absolutely, and you get to watch those guys, and maybe this will be the beginning of a new trend for Paul and me here. We'll have to figure that out, Paul. But
it's still new for us, but we found a lot of really cool ways of engaging on all of our channels and stuff. So it's been a really neat way to engage with a different segment of the people who might be interested in the kind of stuff that we're doing. So
we
highly recommend it.
The challenge is
go ahead.
The challenge is not to forget that you're also making audio, right?
Totally.
We did a couple episodes where it was like, oh, look at what yours going on in your room. Oh, look at your hair, or whatever. is useless as a podcast. Totally pointless.
Yeah. So. No, we found that out with the other show that I do, Mac Gig Gab. We started when quarantine began. That's when we made the jump to including video, because people had been asking for it for 10 years or whatever, and it was like, yeah, we should do this, but it was like, we need to make sure we remember we're letting people watch us record an audio show, and for the most part we succeed. It's there are times, but yeah. Yeah,
that's part of the reason why I'm wearing a hat, because I'm staring at myself in a camera, and if I didn't have a hat on, I'd be sitting here like messing with my hair the entire time. Yeah. That's like the worst first impression for a bunch of people who may or may not know what we're doing. So
yeah, my hair's we spent the afternoon and we bought one of those adult-sized kiddie pools when quarantine began, because we had something to do at home in the afternoons when it was 95 degrees, and so I spent the afternoon in that, and I can see that my hair is like just not quite what I would normally present, but whatever, it's fine. People have seen me on stage way sweatier and way worse than this.
There you go.
Yeah. I actually like that. That's one of my favorite states to be in, is hot, sweaty, and satisfied.
For sure.
After being on stage.
Yeah.
We live in the South. That's the only state you can be in. So,
after living, I played a bunch of gigs when I lived in Austin, Texas, and people ask me, "Oh, didn't you hate the heat?" I'm like, "No, I'd much rather play in the heat than the cold. The cold is awful outside."
I'm of two minds of that, but I can see both sides to it.
Yeah.
My band stage look is black jeans, members only jacket with a black T-shirt, and definitely had a couple of summertime 2-hour gigs where I'm like, oh, this is how I die.
I see it coming.
I can see the light. But I'm actually we're not going to get any gigs this summer more than likely. But I was working on a whole summertime look. I was going to switch everything up, but I don't think I have to worry about that.
Well,
this year.
Next year. That's right. Yeah. You got time to really craft it. That's 100%. Right. Yeah. Those of us that were making jokes about having 2020 vision back in November really had those jokes are not aging well. No.
Oh, no, we didn't see it coming, right? That's the irony.
That's it.
Oh.
Yeah.
There it is.
There it is. All right.
And Dan, you did it. Dan, you did the thing that you always do in our show, and you did it in their show.
That's awesome.
You said a terrible joke, and nobody laughed, and it ruined everything.
It ruined everything.
That's so good.
Dan Ray.
I ruined everything. That's what I do. That's what I do.
This is how we do it. So from Gig Gab for Cover Band Confidential, I'm Dave Hamilton. He is
Paul Kent.
From Atlanta, Georgia, I'm Adam Johnson.
There it is.
I'm Dan Ray.
There it is.
All right, we'll play our music on the way out. Yeah, we can hear you. We got you, Dan. We're good.
Yeah.
Should we do like the Brady Bunch thing where we look at each other in the boxes?
Wait, hang on. Oh, wait, no. Here's what I gotta say. Guys, always be performing.
Oh no!
And we're out. That's it. Perfect. That was perfect.